Good morning. Please turn to page 27 in your packet. Today we're going to be reading a story about the age of exploration. And let's talk a little bit first about what this is. So, the age of exploration took place between the 15th and 17th centuries. So, what we're looking at here is back in the day for sure. And I wanted to kind of give you a visual example of some of the things that they may have seen in the 15th through the 17th century. So, let's look at a printing press was invented. Um, it looks like the parachute was invented during that time. We had golf was invented during that time. That's kind of fun. And then, of course, they have all of these really fun things that they were wearing. This is in 15th century and 14th century Europe. And so in Italy, of course. Lots of fancy dresses, lots of layers, lots of modest clothing. They were definitely into covering their bodies, even though it was really hot. So they still wanted to make sure that they were modest. And then something that we're going to be looking at in this story talks about trade routes for ships. So remember, there were no planes back during this time period. Ships were the only way to get things from one place to the other. We had already discovered many of the continents, but of course not all of them at that time. And Christopher Columbus had already discovered North America in 1492. So during this age of exploration, he was a great explorer that we'll also talk about. But just pay attention to where some of these trade routes ran. A lot of them came from this area, which is Spain. This country that's highlighted here is Spain. So a lot of the trade routes came from Spain, and then they went to different places all over the world. All right, so a couple of people to know. This is Prince Henry the Navigator, Christopher Columbus, who of course discovered North America, or is given credit for doing so anyway. And then Ponce de Leon, which I'm sure you've heard of before because he is the reason we found Florida. He actually was looking for what he believed was the fountain of youth that he had heard about in myths and tales. And so he actually discovered Florida. Okay, so follow along on page 27 of your packet as we read together. It says page 26, but you need to be on page 27, please. So we're going to be reading about the age of exploration. One of the greatest periods of world exploration occurred between the 15th and 17th centuries. This period is called the Age of Exploration. During this time, explorers from Europe made many discoveries around the world. The main purpose for exploring during this time was to find and trade goods. Europeans needed spices, silk, and other products found in Africa and Asia, but traveling to distant places took long periods of time. It was important to find good trade routes that were both safe from thieves and short. The Age of Exploration began in Portugal as explorers launched ships in search of a better route to Africa. Up to this time, most traders made long, difficult trips across the desert. Prince Henry the Navigator was the leader of exploration for Portugal in the 1400s. He had great success finding trade routes to Africa across the ocean. After Prince Henry discovered these routes, other explorers began to find other routes as well. Soon, explorers were traveling to India to trade. To compete with Portugal's India trading routes, Spain gave explorers such as Christopher Columbus ships so that they could find better routes to India. In his quest to find these routes, Columbus instead found the continent of North America. Let's stop there for a minute, and I want to introduce you to a concept that a lot of people don't completely understand. When Columbus landed in the United States, he thought he was in India, which is actually why Native Americans are called Indians. He named the Native Americans Indians because he believed he was in India. It took him a while to figure out that he wasn't in India, but unfortunately, by that time, people called Native Americans Indians. So that's why we don't call that group of individuals Indians anymore, because we now know that he was wrong. Let's continue following along. Explorers from other countries began visiting North America in the 1500s. Spain began to colonize the New World. Hernan Cortes settled in Mexico. Juan Ponce de Leon searched for the legendary Fountain of Youth. His travels resulted in the discovery of Florida, which was then quickly colonized. The success of explorers from Spain and Portugal led France and England to send ships to America. The explorers from these two countries claimed land and often fought over territory, taking land from each other by force. Several wars were waged for territory. Finally came the American Revolution, leading to the creation of a new nation independent from European countries. The end of the American Revolution also marked the end of the Age of Exploration. Now, on your own piece of paper, please answer the questions on page 27 and page 28. And remember that for questions number 5 and 6, I expect to see complete sentences answered. Also, make sure that you answer in at least 3 sentences minimum for each of those questions. If it asks you for text evidence, please make sure you use quotes.